One of these sci-fi movies was so extreme it was a crime to own a copy. Another had an alien worm assaulting a woman to death. Every movie here would be impossible to make today, because no studio in 2026 has the balls to put this on screen. Back in the 80s, Roger Corman saw Alien make a fortune and decided he wanted a piece of it. He hired a young James Cameron to do production design, told him to make everything look as alien-like as possible, and started shooting. The premise was solid enough. A crew lands on a planet that pulls your deepest fears out of your head and turns them into real creatures that kill you. One guy gets lowered into a chamber and tentacles come out of nowhere and drain all the blood from his body. Someone else crawls through a tunnel and tentacles crush her head. Another guy gets torn apart by a monster. But partway through production, Corman decided the movie needed more. Specifically, he wanted a scene involving one of the female crew members and some giant maggot creature, and he wanted it explicit. The screenwriter objected. The actress had signed on thinking she'd be playing a competent astronaut, not doing what Corman was asking for. And the director, Bruce Clark, flat out refused to shoot it and walked off set. Corman didn't care. He stepped behind the camera himself and directed the scene exactly how he wanted it. The giant maggot creature pins her down, covers her in slime, and sexually assaults her until she dies. Critics called Galaxy of Terror trashy and gross, basically Alien cranked up to sleaze factor 10. And that scene became the only thing anyone remembers about the movie. Easily the most sci-fi horror of the entire 80s. In the 80s, there was a whole underground industry built on stealing from Hollywood. Italy was especially good at it. Filmmakers would watch American blockbusters and just remake them, scene for scene, sometimes word for word. Bruno Mattei was one of the masters, and in 1989 he made something so shameless it became an urban legend. The movie is set in a dystopian, polluted Venice, where soldiers investigate gruesome deaths at an underground facility. Then the underground fortresses are besieged by aliens. They look kind of awesome, actually, and that's the only good thing about this movie. Because Mattei didn't write a script. He just took aliens, lifted entire scenes, and copied some dialogue word for word. Then about halfway through, he glued Terminator onto it. A robot assassin shows up and suddenly it's a different movie entirely. And here's the audacity. Mattei released this thing as Terminator 2. A full year before James Cameron's actual sequel came out. It was a hit overseas. Never released in America for obvious reasons, it couldn't be. For decades, it was basically impossible to find. There was a company called Trans World Entertainment that had been making money off the VHS boom, buying up cheap horror movies and releasing them on tape. The founder figured if he could make his own alien-type movie, he could break into theaters. So he found a director named William Malone and gave him $350,000. Malone made every cent count. The movie's set on Titan, Saturn's moon. A crew answers a distress call, finds an alien that doesn't just kill you, it takes over your body. It plants parasites in its victims, and once you're dead, your corpse walks around doing whatever the creature needs. Malone packed the movie with lots of awesome-looking gore. There's a face ripping, a decapitation, some parasite puppeted zombies, and a head explosion that rivals Scanners. He made something that looked way more expensive than it was, and it got him noticed. Years later, he directed House on Haunted Hill, but this is where he proved what he could do with limited resources. Roger Corman walked up to one of his editors, a guy named Alan Holdsman, and gave him a challenge. 4 days, no script, put together a 7-minute opening for a space movie. So Holdsman grabbed footage from another Corman production, Battle Beyond the Stars, and cut together a space battle sequence. Corman watched it and liked it enough to give him the whole film. The plot's simple. A genetic experiment goes wrong, a creature starts mutating and turning victims into piles of goo. What makes this one stand out is how much it leans into the gore. There's no shame here, practical effects everywhere, victims melting into protein sludge. The creature Holtzman came up with doesn't just kill people, it injects them with something that liquefies their DNA. Victims dissolve while they're still screaming. The lab ends up coated in slime. The creature feeds on what used to be a person, just this soupy protein mess. Every time it absorbs someone, it grows bigger and nastier. By the end, it barely looks like the thing from the first act. Holtzman delivered everything Corman wanted: gore, slime, and gratuitous nudity. There's a scene where two female crew members take a shower together for absolutely no reason, just because Corman required skin in every production. Later, one of them gets attacked by the creature in the lab and dies half-naked, covered in slime. The whole movie runs barely over an hour. People start melting within the first 20 minutes and it never lets up. This is not a good movie, but it's pretty watchable if you want trashy fun. If you want real sci-fi horror, skip it. If you want pure, brainless B-movie excess, Forbidden World delivers. A group of friends in New Jersey had $25,000 and a basement. They decided to make a monster movie. They built the creature themselves out of rubber and fake teeth. It's basically a mass of mouths. Hundreds of teeth, multiple heads sprouting from one body, no eyes, no face, nothing recognizable. When it opens up to feed, there's just more teeth inside. They shot the whole thing in someone's house over weekends and holidays. The story is as basic as it gets. A meteor hits. Something crawls into a family's basement and starts eating everyone it finds. The monster grows new heads, the bodies start piling up, and the gore gets creative. The dialogue is forgettable and the acting is amateur. Nobody's pretending otherwise. But that monster they built in a basement looks better than creatures from movies with 10 times the budget. It bites people's heads clean off, rips the skin right off their bodies, devours them whole. There's a scene where it tears through a group of teenagers at a party, and by the end the screen is drenched in blood and shredded body parts. The Deadly Spawn is the definition of ultra-low-budget sci-fi splatter. It became this cult classic that proved you didn't need money to make something memorable. Before Peter Jackson made the Lord of the Rings trilogy and won all those Oscars, he made a movie about aliens turning humans into fast food. Shot it on weekends. Took him 4 years with basically no budget. The movie's called Bad Taste, and the title isn't kidding. Jackson plays two characters in the film. One of them gets his skull cracked open. And I mean literally cracked open. You can see the brain. So Jackson's character takes a belt, straps it around his head to hold his brain in, and just keeps going. That's the kind of movie this is. There's a scene where a guy scoops brains out of a split skull and eats them. There's an alien drinking vomit straight from a bowl. There's an exploding sheep. Jackson did all the effects himself at home, and every single frame has something wet and disgusting happening in it. The violence is so over the top it stops being scary and becomes funny. That was the whole point. Jackson called the style splatstick, slapstick comedy, but with gore. Every gag is bigger and messier than the last one. It's a gory circus that never takes itself seriously, and people rightfully call it one of the bloodiest films in history. Bad Taste is now considered a cult classic, one of the most extreme splatter films ever made, and the guy who directed it went on to win Best Picture twice. There's a sci-fi horror from 1986 called Breeders, and once you know who directed it, everything about it makes sense. An alien creature prowls around Manhattan attacking virgin women and impregnating them. These women fall into comas and get drawn to a slime-filled lair in the sewers where the alien keeps them in cocoon pods waiting to give birth. A detective and a health inspector try to figure out what's happening. The director was a guy named Tim Kincaid. Before Breeders, Tim Kincaid directed adult films under a different name. So it makes total sense that this movie is basically a cheap alien ripoff crossed with softcore. Every victim is a young model or college student. There's constant nudity. The whole thing feels like someone watched Alien and thought, what if we added way more naked women? There's one scene where a victim in a hospital bed spontaneously explodes with alien larvae. It's trying to do the alien chestburster moment with about 1% of the budget. The effects are cheap, the acting is bad, and the whole thing is just sleazy as hell. But back in the 80s, people actually rented it. Roger Corman churned out low-budget movies like they were on an assembly line. Most of them were garbage, but every once in a while something halfway decent came out of that factory. The Terror Within is one of the better alien ripoffs Corman ever made. And yeah, it's still a ripoff, but a surprisingly watchable one. In the movie, chemical warfare wiped out most of humanity. The survivors live in an underground bunker. Outside, there are these gargoyle-like creatures that impregnate human women to reproduce. During a patrol, the survivors find a wounded woman in the desert and bring her back to the bunker. Turns out she's pregnant with a monster, so they decide to abort it. They're literally about to perform the procedure when the thing bursts out of her stomach and escapes into the air vents. Now they've got an alien loose in their bunker, picking them off one by one. You've seen this movie before. You've seen it done better. But what's surprising is how gory it gets. Buckets of blood, entrails everywhere, creatures ripping people apart. For a cheap Corman production, they went all in on the splatter. The lead actor, Andrew Stevens, must have liked it too. When they made a sequel 2 years later, he directed it himself. So there's this whole subgenre of killer bug movies from the 80s, right? And every time someone lists the best ones, the nest gets left off. Which is a shame because this movie is absolutely insane. On paper, it sounds like every other cheap creature feature. Mysterious scientist shows up in a small island town. Genetically engineered cockroaches start eating people. Mayor ignores the problem until it's too late. You've seen this setup 100 times. For about an hour, the nest plays it completely safe. Standard small-town horror stuff. Characters you've met before. Tension building the way you'd expect. And if you turned it off at the 60-minute mark, you'd think you just watched a forgettable B-movie. Then the third act hits and the movie loses its mind. The practical effects team basically said and went all in. Roaches start stripping people down to the bone. Bodies fuse together into grotesque human-bug hybrids. There's this human roach queen just oozing everywhere. There's a scene where a cat gets taken over by the bugs, full-on body horror like something out of The Thing. And it all builds to this climax where a giant monster explodes in a wave of slime. This was a Roger Corman production, by the way. Low budget, quick shoot, straight to video. But whoever did the effects clearly didn't get the memo that they were supposed to phone it in. If you want to see 1980s practical effects at their most disgusting and creative, this is the one. This one's a British production, and it was so extreme it actually got banned. A bunch of filmmakers in the UK watched Alien and thought, we can do that, but sleazier. They came up with a story about a space expedition where an alien creature attacks a female crew member, impregnates her, and drives her homicidally insane as the alien babies grow inside her. She develops superhuman strength, starts craving human flesh, and turns on her colleagues one by one. The director knew he was pushing it. There's a scene where the alien inseminates the woman with this translucent appendage pumping green fluid into her. If they filmed it the obvious way, censors would cut it immediately. The movie would be dead on arrival. So they shot the whole thing like it's a dream sequence. The director said that if they'd filmed it straight, it would have played like a scene and gotten sliced to pieces by the ratings board. It worked, sort of. The British censors demanded some cuts but didn't ban it outright. Then the Video Recordings Act passed, and suddenly police could seize videotapes of films deemed obscene. Inseminoid ended up on that list, one of 82 movies that UK authorities could legally confiscate from your home. In the US, the Los Angeles Times called it one of the most violent and nauseating space horror films in recent memory. They said the torture and exploitation were ferocious, called it dangerous and vile filmmaking. Meanwhile, Roger Corman sent them congratulations.